We're 99. I don't know what that means, Wiki but sure, whatever. You're 99
I'm not
years
99. Old. I'm 26.
Apparently Wiki is 99 years old, because that's what they say in their new single. What's up, everyone? It is Nate from Truly Daebak with another episode of the DaebakCast. This is episode 134, and Andrew didn't do his thing, so something's happening. He just missed. You didn't do your finger thing. I just said what number it was.
Oh, sorry. I was looking. I got distracted by this clip that's playing on. Okay, it's all covered. Okay, 1, 3, 4.
Yeah, there you go.
Happy.
If you don't know what the DaebakCast is, it is a podcast, a weekly podcast where we talk about K-pop and all things interesting in the Korean entertainment industry. We do album reviews most of the time, and then occasionally have topics. What else? I'm forgetting my opening for some reason. If you like the video, subscribe to us on YouTube. Like the videos, physically like them on YouTube. Click the notification bell, because then you'll get notified when videos go up. And then you can follow us on Twitter. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple, like iTunes podcast, Apple Podcast now, because
it's
iTunes going away. It's
because iTunes isn't a thing. It's just going to be Apple Music,
Apple Music, and Apple Podcasts and Apple Movies. And
that's
going
to be weird.
So we're on Apple Podcasts. So review us there, because that helps us a lot. And of course, to join our Discord, it is mucho lit. So we have a small Discord channel. It's a nice little community there that hangs out and talks about stuff, and meets up at KCON. If you're at KCON LA, you could have met up with our mods and a couple of our members of our Discord. Mm-hmm. So
I can't afford to go there.
Yeah, I don't have the vacation time to go there.
Same.
And so it's a good place to hang out if you want to find some cool people to talk to about K-pop. I'm Nate, like I said, and as always, I am joined by Andrew, who usually has 3 things.
Number 1, this was just a really busy week in regards to, MMA and wrestling or whatever, because so New Japan Pro Wrestling had this thing called the G1 Climax. It's like their big wrestling tournament show or whatever. The funny thing, or how this relates to K-pop, is there was this big storyline where one of the wrestlers, his name is Kenta, he became a bad guy and joined this thing called Bullet Club, and so hashtag Kenta was trending on Twitter, and then all these K-pop fans or JBJ95 fans are getting confused.
We're like, hey Kenta, why
did you turn into a bad guy?
Trending.
Yeah, everyone was a bit confused there. And then there was UFC 241 last night, which I have which is funny because so the main event of it was this heavyweight fight between the champion Daniel Cormier and the former champion who took the belt off of Stipe Miocic. So in the 4th round, Stipe Miocic knocks out the champion Daniel Cormier. He wins the belt back, and at the end he does this Irish jig dance. It was hilarious. So Mighty Egg Girl from our Discord decided to do some clip splicing, and he put the clip of Stipe Miocic doing the sort of Irish jig thing to Twice As What Is Love music video.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
They do something similar.
Yeah, they do something similar to that, so that's pretty funny. I wonder, hopefully Stipe finds it. I don't think he will, but yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Number 2 on the list, I guess music relevant. Tool is on Spotify now.
Yep.
That's huge news, because Tool was probably one of the few holdouts in terms of music streaming. For the longest time it was Led Zeppelin and then the Beatles, and those both of those started doing streaming. But yeah, Tool for the longest time was a holdout. So that's actually pretty cool, because I'd have to go on YouTube if I wanted to listen to Schism or something. I don't know any of their music. Yeah. So yeah, that's cool. If you like Tool, you can go listen to them on Spotify or whatever music streaming service you use. Apple Music.
Yeah, I wonder if they're on Apple Music. I didn't check.
Mm-hmm. I really don't. I only know Schism in all honesty, though. I only know it because I learned because my friend.
Rock band.
Yeah, Rock band, and I learned how to play it on bass, like the that bass line's amazing. And number 3, Jacob's not with us again because he's actually busy with his dad's wedding. Yeah, his dad's getting married this weekend, so congrats to him. Hope everything goes well. Jake was talking about like how he had to like get like a nice suit and everything for it. So yeah, sounds fun.
Yep, congrats.
Apparently, Jacob talks to his dad about K-pop sometimes.
Oh, really? When did he say that?
No, he says he shows him like Xiao and like other like indie stuff.
Like the indie stuff.
Yeah, because his dad's a big like rock music fan, so he's just like, yeah, he likes Xiao apparently. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And
those are the three things. So that's all I have to talk about on that front. So
yeah, like Andrew said, Jacob's not here. He still doesn't have blow note, so regardless, it doesn't matter whether he's here or not. There's no blow note.
There is no blow note.
Hashtag no blow note. So yeah, let's get into. So this week we got 3 topics and then a review. But we're doing a little out of order. We're gonna do 2 of our topics first, which Andrew will be covering. So let's go to topic 1, which is Hong Kong and China. Not very related to K-pop right now, but we'll get there.
We'll get there, definitely. So the title of this video is going to be like Hong Kong protests, One China policy, and like how it's affecting K-pop. So
shorten down because that's way too long for a YouTube title.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. I'll see if it can fit on like YouTube, like YouTube's 100 character limit. But so it's kind of going to be a history lesson, but I feel it's like important to sort of get the full context as to why K-pop or Chinese K-pop idols are reacting sort of the way, or why everyone's reacting in this sort of way, or what the sort of crux of the current protests and incidents going on in Hong Kong right now are. So I thought it best to sort of do a bit of history, and I guess how I'm going to proposing this topic is I'm going to be giving most of the information. Nate is, I guess, going to be the sort of representative of the viewer, asking questions.
I don't really have any. I know what the average person I feel like knows. Well, maybe not the average person, because the average person's probably pretty dumb and doesn't pay attention to anything relating to foreign politics. But I have a very cursory knowledge of what the hell is going on and between China and Hong Kong. So
well, I mean, okay, so I guess we could start there. Just like, what do you know in general about like the history of Hong Kong, or just like what
history wise? Not much, but I just know like they're kind of like a separate state type thing where they kind of see themselves as independent of China. China doesn't see them as independent, and there's kind of just like this weird standoff of competing like claim of territory.
It
would be like if Puerto Rico like didn't think it was part of the US and the US was like, no, you're still a US territory.
Yeah, something like that.
Maintained status quo, because it would hurt China to actually go through and like forcibly take it, because so much goes through Hong Kong.
But I mean,
maybe, I don't know. That part I don't know. That part
you pretty much gave the basic overview. I'm gonna like go from like the very beginning. So, I mean, I don't know how many people know this, because again, it's kind of like old history. And if you're born past like the 1997, you probably aren't familiar with Hong Kong's history as a British colony. So how that came about was like in like the 1700s and 1800s, like Hong Kong was, well, I mean, like the Silk Road thing, and like how like, oh, everyone was trading with China, and like all these Western European countries, all wanted all the goods they have. So it was kind of continuing through that. Hong Kong was sort of like a big place to do all that trade. European countries wanted like tea, silk, just like all these Chinese goods. And in return, they either gave them like money, like precious metals, or in the British Empire's case, they gave them opium, which came from India, because India was also a British colony. So they gave them all these drugs, opium. A lot of it was making its way into China, and it essentially caused a drug crisis. I mean, it's literally like the whole opium like addiction crisis is like a direct sort of influence as to why like countries like Japan, China, Korea still like they take drug like accusations really seriously. Like even to this day, it stretches back all the way from like these opium crises. So at this time, China was being ruled by the Qing dynasty. So obviously they didn't like everyone getting addicted to all these drugs or just like having it sort of affect society and I guess the people there. So they wanted them to stop. Obviously Britain didn't want to. So it sort of came to an impasse where China, Qing Dynasty, ordered a halt on trade, and then they basically pulled like a Boston Tea Partied like all of the opium. Essentially, they destroyed all of it, which led to the first Opium War in 1839. So Britain, again, obviously wanting to protect their interests in Hong Kong, decided to go to war with China over it. And if you know anything about Britain in like the 1800s, they're like the most powerful empire in the whole world. Like they have the British Royal Navy is probably was probably the most powerful navy at the time. So it's safe to say that it was kind of a one-sided conflict. Like they destroyed, or I think that the death toll on England's side or British Empire side was like in the hundreds. China endured casualties in the thousands, 20,000. So yeah. So in the aftermath of the war, they came to an agreement called the Treaty of Nanking, which was signed in August of 1842, and it signaled the end of conflict. And as part of, I guess, sort of reparations and sort of making deals to end the war, they gave control of Hong Kong to the British Empire. That's how they gained control of it as a sort of British Empire territory. It wasn't done though. Like they ended up having another Opium War because they didn't completely sort of quell the tensions. But in that war, it was the British Empire, French Empire, and the U.S. were all involved. So yeah, safe to say Qing Dynasty got destroyed again. And in the agreement for that, the agreement was Britain got control of Kowloon. So Kowloon, I'll show some like images here for our audience. Kowloon is this sort of peninsula to the north of Hong Kong Island. Like Hong Kong itself is just like a tiny island in like the south of China, and then above that is Kowloon. So they got control of that, and then in 1898, so like 20 or so years after the Second Opium War, they bought a 99-year agreement lease to buy what's called the New Territories. So basically, that's just everything that surrounds Hong Kong and Kowloon. So just like the rest of like the landmass there, and there's some like islands and everything. So they purchased a 99-year lease, which was so it was going to expire in 1998. But before we got to that, though, basically sometime in like 1949, communists took over China. So a lot of people fled to Hong Kong to sort of just like escape the Chinese communist regime. Some people fled to Taiwan. That's basically how modern day Taiwan was established. The original like government of China essentially like fled to Taiwan and essentially set up their government there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so that's why like if you that's why they're called the Republic of Taiwan, like their official name, or like the Republic of China is their official name. I mean, people were living on Taiwan, like it's not like there was no one there, and they just it's not like they did like
they just
civilization.
Took over.
Yeah, like there were people living there.
Like, no, this is ours now.
Yeah, people are living there like already, and they're just like, yep, we're just gonna set up New China here, I guess. Basically, after all of this happened, after Britain had control of all of these territories, you get this like really big boom period from like the late 50s, early 60s to like the 90s, and you get what's known as the four Asian tigers. That's sort of like in terms of economics. So when they're referring to four Asian tigers, you're talking about Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea. So those are like the four like big countries that were like economic powerhouses in that time. So because the thing is though, because obviously everyone was afraid of communism, Red Scare, that whole thing, no one was doing business with China. So like Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea were making a lot of good business and just like making a lot of money off of that, taking advantage of that situation. So basically like all of them had like really good business laws and like export friendly government economic policies, because they wanted to appeal to like Western, like America and like Europe. They have a lot of personal freedom, economic freedom, and like a lot of good business. So Hong Kong and Singapore, even to this day, are still known as like really big financial trading hubs, because like Hong Kong has a stock exchange, Singapore has a stock exchange. That's why you have a lot of business people that are sort of based out of Hong Kong, or a lot of businesses that are based out of there. And then Taiwan and Korea, even to this day, are still big in fields like electronics and manufacturing and medicine. Like still to this day, like Korea is like their advanced medicine and like their medical science is insane. So yeah, that's sort of what they became known for. So basically that boom period lasted until like the mid 90s, until there was an Asian financial crisis in 1997 that sort of halted it. But also what happened in 1997 was they were approaching the end of that 99-year lease that like Britain made on the new territories. So everyone was kind of like uneasy about what was going to happen with that. So in 1984, the current United Kingdom decided to sort of strike an agreement called the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And basically it was just an outline of the process of, okay, how are we going to hand over like Hong Kong, Kowloon, new territories back into like the hands of China, like the People's Republic of China, because they didn't want to like hold on to the land. They wanted to give it back to them and everything. So the agreement was that on July 1st, 1987, they'd give all of the territory that they gained through the Opium Wars and everything back to China, and they would operate under what's called the One Country, Two Systems policy. So what that means is that, okay, People's Republic of China, like mainland China, they do all like the communism and socialism type thing, but Hong Kong, Kowloon, new territories, Macau, like those areas, they don't have to they're not subject to that. They basically can do whatever they're doing, and they're allowed to stay, like they're allowed to keep their current economic or like their capitalist economic structures for a 50-year period, with that with that sort of like grace period expiring in 2047. So actually there were, after when the turnover happened, there were a lot of people that were leaving Hong Kong. Like if you ever go to Vancouver, basically like Vancouver's it's like almost all like Chinese there, because pretty much everyone that had like business and like money in Hong Kong, they bought up like property and like and started like move their money over to Vancouver, just because they were afraid that the communist government would take all of it. So yeah, that's why there was like there was a mass exodus out of Hong Kong then. So I mean, one country, two systems is actually a different thing than one China policy, because that's another sort of phrase we've been like hearing thrown around. One China policy is directly related to Taiwan, where basically if you recognize one China policy, it means that even though there are two countries that are named China, there's the People's Republic of China, which is mainland China, and then the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. You're only allowed to recognize it as just like one like big whole China, and that's why like when like Tzuyu got in trouble. Yeah, because she held like the Taiwanese flag and everything. So like any acknowledgement of that is very it's not good when it comes to like relations to mainland China. It's why Taiwan doesn't have representation in the UN, because they are considered part of China. It's why if you see in the Olympics, they're not allowed to use the name Taiwan. They have to use Chinese Taipei, because again they're not recognized as their own like sovereign state. So that's like sort of like the prehistory of it, or just leading up to, I guess, sort of where we're getting to now. So I guess in the modern day, I guess the economic powers sort of shifted away from Hong Kong to some degree towards mainland China, because like in the 90s and 2000s, like because once we started doing business with the US started doing business with China in the 1970s, they started doing more manufacturing here. Again, everyone knows it's like the whole made in China stereotype, where everything like bad or whatever, everything cheap is made in China. You know, once they started getting a lot of that business, China started to make a lot of money. It started becoming less dependent on Hong Kong to sort of carry the financial burden for the rest of China, because places like Shanghai became really big like financial centers and like business centers, and then you have all this manufacturing happening in like South China, like near Hong Kong, in like Shenzhen and Guangzhou, which is where everything's made essentially. Like we make shoes there, you make like electronics there. So pretty much up until that point, basically when China was relying on Hong Kong to carry like all the financial burden, they were like, okay, you can have your freedom, you can do all this sort of stuff, we'll leave you alone. But now that Hong Kong isn't as important in terms of their like financial security, they don't feel the need to respect their sovereignty as much because again it's not really like them it's not really like going to be that much of a like detriment to them if anything happens with Hong Kong. So so basically a lot of people in Hong Kong have felt that China is slowly being encroaching on Hong Kong's autonomy, and like trying to sort of subject them to Chinese rule or subject them to like Chinese mentality. And if you ask people that live in Hong Kong, they don't think of themselves as like Chinese. Same thing with if you ask people that live in Taiwan, they think of themselves as Taiwanese. They think of themselves as Hong Kongers. They make that difference, or they try to make that difference from being like Chinese. So which obviously angers China and Beijing a lot. So that's why they try to sort of quell any of that dissidence. So are you familiar with the term universal suffrage or just suffrage in general?
I mean, depends on how it's used. I mean, like the right to vote.
Yeah, that's basically it. So, I mean, I really don't know how to like sugarcoat this or just like explain this easily, but Hong Kong does not have universal suffrage. So, they have elected officials, and to some degree, they can vote. It's just not everything is subject to vote from like the voting populace. So how it works is half of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, basically their Congress, is you can elect directly. Like you can like do like basically how it is in the US where everyone runs and then you vote and that sort of thing. The other half are appointed by something called the Election Committee. It's this small group of like 800 to 1,200 members. It's comprised exclusively of high-ranking business people and from like different like sectors of business and legislative officials. So that's definitely come under a lot of scrutiny because everyone feels that the only people that are elected there are the ones that are, you know, friendly with China, or the ones that like basically it's only working in the interest of the rich people, not like the regular common working person. And that same election committee is in charge of electing the chief executive of Hong Kong, basically their president, the equivalent to their president or their governor, basically the highest ranking official. That's crazy that Hong Kong or Hong Kongers as citizens do not have the right to elect the highest ranking government official that's supposed to be working in their favor. A lot of this came to a head in 2014 because there was a proposal in 2014 because everyone was talking about like having universal suffrage, allowing everyone to vote, but basically the Chinese influence was what they wanted to do exactly was, okay, they'll let them vote on like candidate, or they'll let everyone vote on candidates, but they have to be approved by the election committee. And again, the election committee or a lot of people on the election committee answer to Beijing. So that's what sparked a lot of protests and all of this outrage. Basically, it's the specific wording for the conditions was, it said, quote, "The chief executive shall be a person who loves the country, China, and loves Hong Kong." So that was their criteria for it. So yeah, that sparked a lot of protest and outrage because again, people thought it was just like it's phony suffrage, or that you're only getting to, because anyone that isn't like in favor or pro Beijing or pro China would just get screened out immediately. They wouldn't even get presented to the voting public. So that's why there was a lot of protests. So they did like a lot of sit-ins, they did a lot of marches. It became known as the Umbrella Movement because basically like the riot police were just like throwing like tear gas and like pepper spray and everything. And so what they would do is they would like have umbrellas everywhere, so like to help deflect the like the pepper spray and everything. So yeah, the umbrella having an umbrella out is sort of became like the icon or like the symbol of just like universal suffrage in Hong Kong. So that's actually pretty cool. Like you wouldn't think of a random like umbrella just being like a political like statement or whatever. And a lot of all the people that were in charge of it were like students, like people our age, and they got arrested and given like months in prison because for of kind of just like maybe like colonial era laws about like unruliness or like inciting like conspiracy and that sort of thing. So that definitely sparked a lot of outrage on behalf of the protesters. And in 2015, they eventually shot down that proposal, like 28 to 8. Some of the pro-China voting bloc, they tried to like stall the vote and everything, but eventually it got shut down. So they just reverted to the previous method of, okay, the election committee is the only one that decides the voting. So I don't know if it was for better or worse in that case. This resulted directly in the election of Carrie Lam, who is Hong Kong's first female chief executive. Carrie Lam is still the chief executive today. And unsurprisingly, Carrie Lam is a pro-Beijing ideologist and definitely has pro-Beijing leanings and pro-Beijing backing. So, like, how they do elections over there is, you know, in like Star Wars, when like the prequels, when like the separatist movement, we're talking about like, oh, like the banking clan or like the whatever, like the Kaminoans or whatever. That's basic. Yeah, that's basically how. That's how it works in Hong Kong, where basically you have to appeal to like representatives of each different industry to sort of vote for you. So you have people from like the tourism industry, or like the people that run like hotels, people that run like manufacturing and that sort of thing. So that's how the voting works over there. You have to appeal to like different like sectors of industry. So yeah, I mean, for me at least, as a freedom loving American that hasn't known anything else, it's kind of different and maybe a bit scary.
Yeah. I just spent all of today watching Chernobyl, so I got a good taste of how communism works.
I mean, definitely appropriate for the discussion.
Communism bureaucracy.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people have been sort of in favor or wanting universal suffrage, because again, it's only working in the interest of people who control a lot of business, who control a lot of power and money in Hong Kong, not necessarily like the regular, everyday working man out there. So that's why like there's all of these, they call them like class like protests, or like basically people between different like social classes and social standings just sort of fighting against each other. So any questions so far after that? Because that's probably the end of part 1. No,
it made sense to me. I mean, it was basically just a history lesson, so don't have too many questions, but
okay.
It's definitely interesting how all of it came about.
Yeah, because not many people know about like the history of just like how Britain was involved in that sort of thing. So I'd have to be honest though, at first blush, like I didn't really like the song just because I don't know. It's definitely a song that kind of took some growing to sort of.
I'm surprised you like it at all.
I mean, yeah, like if you know me, I pretty much hate anything that's Tropical House Moonbaton. Like I find it